Well, so good afternoon from the Vatican, good evening, good morning to all of you who are here again with us in these webinar sessions organized by the Dicastery for the Laity, Family and Life in collaboration with the John Paul II Foundation for Sport. And I'm happy to welcome all of you here again in this day that we will have the opportunity to talk with three fantastic people about inclusive sport. As you know, the session of today talks about inclusive sport, an opportunity not to be missed. And I think it's a great opportunity, not also a challenge, but a great opportunity the pandemic has given us to talk about how not to lose this opportunity to include another approaches, to have different point of views, to restart sport in a different way, in a better way, putting the person at the center of sport, as we have mentioned in our past sessions. And with this said, I would like to give the floor to our first speaker, which is Cristina Gangemi. Cristina Gangemi holds a master's degree in pastoral theology and lay ministry with a special focus on disability. She is the director of the Kairos Forum, which focuses on enabling communities to be places of belonging for people with a disability. She has had an extensive experience in special education, the training of special lay ministers and parent support. She has recently worked with the Vatican on issues regarding disability, sport, and new evangelization. And among other things, during the 2012 Games in London, she was a spokesperson for the Christian community and is a national advisor to the Catholic Bishops' Conference of England and Wales. She has written a book entitled Because I Am, probably one of the first faith-based resources for parents and parishes following a pre-birth diagnosis of possible disability. So it's an honor to introduce Cristina Gangemi, who will make the introduction of this session. Cristina, whenever you want, thank you for being with us, and the floor is yours.
Thank you for inviting me. Gosh, that sounded very grand. I've been, it's really lovely to be here with everybody. I'm speaking from my classroom, so it's really lovely to be here, and thank you for inviting me. So, that's it. Is that it? I'm okay now? So, thank you for inviting me. That was a very grand introduction. I'm very privileged to have been asked to speak. I think I always say I'm speaking from my classroom now, but I always say to everybody that I've been very blessed in my life. I'm very lucky to have spent 25 years exploring a very central question within the story of the human person. And that is, who decides about being human, or who decides about the human being? One of the things that I've discovered in my journey working with people with and without disabilities is that the touch of God and the breath of God has often been veiled. Very often.
Excuse me, Cristina, we cannot see the slides. You have to share the screen, sorry.
I'm not sure what's happened there.
Sorry.
Can you see it now?
Yes, yes.
Sorry, I'm technologically challenged.
No, it's okay.
Okay, is that okay?
Yes, now better. Thank you.
Sorry. So one of the things I've noticed in my journey is how often Christian art, or any art really, presents a sort of classical norm of what a human person should look like. And over the centuries in the story of the human being, this classical norm has really taken root. And the great gift of diversity has often been rejected in favour of universality, of uniformity. So in the lives and experiences of people with disabilities, there's been thousands of years of disablement. Classical shapes have prevailed, and this has left many people on the outside, excluded. When we think about sport in ancient Rome, in the history of sport, we see that it was a very important part of everyday life. However, when we look at what's been written about sport, there's very little about the mention of inclusivity, and certainly about the inclusiveness of people with disabilities. So ancient writing has never really given enough attention to disability and to inclusion. And so that really has meant that there's been thousands of years of God's promise in the making, that it's never really been evident until very recently. Sports, especially in the past, I would say 20 years, or even less than that, 15 years, with the Paralympic movement and the Special Olympics movement, has brought about a new invitation, and it set forth a very new and very exciting vision for what human potential can be. It's been an invitation to inclusive transformation. I've found that sport unlocks a hidden potential, the secret potential of God, and of revealing the breath of God. And it has brought about a commitment to our neighbour. And we can see here images of Special Olympics, of Paralympians, of team refugees. And for me, this witness is never more evident in the sport perfection or brilliance of the blind athlete, whose guide ever much the same ability, the same sporting ability as the blind athlete, gives themselves up and gives up their own achievement to enable the other. And so here we see shared joy and the evidence of God's breath at work in all people, but more so in the vision of inclusive sport. John Paul II, unique in the journey of sport, experienced the body and spirit of a well-achieved sportsman, but also the experience of a body that was weaker and that experienced disability. And so when he talks about the human person, we have to listen, because his own body makes visible his profound teaching on the value of every human life. So sport is a witness to inclusion. It's a place where people can be together, and it's a way of seeing, as John Paul II said, of seeing and recording universal brotherhood and sisterhood. Sport isn't about them and us. It's a witness to the reality that there is really only an us. So for me, COVID has given everybody an experience of what it's like to be disabled. People have been experienced what it's like to be closed in, not being able to have access to a world, and endangered of being left out. During the COVID pandemic, one of the things that I noticed was that as the whole world went online, So services and access for people with disabilities, especially people with intellectual disabilities, became less and less possible because there were lots of hypercognitive activities and art and all sorts of different activities that went online that really just continued to exclude them out. One of the things that we did was to make sure that we set up activities where people could go and do sport in their garden. And we found lots of examples of disabled children raising money by doing sport in their garden. And it was, again, a wonderful example of how sport holds the potential to reveal something of the mystery of God to every person. And that is that we each are able to manifest true humanity and valued humanity just by being in the world. I think that this generation, those of us that are here on this call today, and those of us that work in this field, have been given a challenge, not just by God, but I think by the human person. And that is to recognize that through the work that we're doing, it's a particular moment in time when change can occur. And we can all be witnesses to the potential of sport as a place of inclusion that welcomes the refugee, that welcomes the disabled person, that welcomes the unique, the athlete, no matter what their body shape and no matter how they want to share their sport. Sport is a place for everybody. It's time, but what's most exciting is that we're the ones to make the change. Thank you.
Thank you, Christina. I think that if I can remark just one thing you just said that I completely agree with it, is that COVID has shown us what it, a little bit what it is to be a disabled, not to have access to a normal life. And also I would like to remark what you said also, that sport unlocks hidden secrets of potential and love and commitment to the neighbor. I think this is these would be two interesting ideas we can discuss later in our debate, in our discussion all together. But now allow me to introduce our personal testimony, which comes from Africa. Even she's an Italian. Alessandra Morelli has been a delegate for the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees since 1992. Her professional experience has been principally in conflict and emergency zone. Operating in this environment, she has worked closely with a wide range of United Nations, NATO, and in particular IGO and NGO partners. She has been involved over many years in negotiating, planning, and coordinating protection or assistance to IDPs, refugees, and returnees with senior government authorities. But allow me to say that Alessandra has a unique strength. She's a tough warrior. She has operated in some of the toughest places in the world. Her recent missions include Sri Lanka, Georgia, Yemen, Afghanistan, Somalia, where she suffered a terrorist attack, and in particular Greece, when almost 1 million refugees and migrants trekked through that country. She was there in the ground. She's currently leading the delegation of the UNHCR operations in Niger, and has previously worked in Italy as well, together with the High Commissioner. Together, she will talk about the experience of how can sport be a means to promote the inclusion of migrants and refugees in society, and in particular from what they are developing in Niger. So Alessandra, Thank you for being with us again, and the floor is yours.
Well, thank you very, very much, and a big hello, very warm hello. View the climate, temperature starts to rise. To all of you, it's a pleasure really to share my experience. I'm honored to be part of this distinguished platform. I bring to the table my life in between, in the midst of refugees, IDPs, and chaos, as I normally say. And I try to bring coherence and a solution to chaos, whereby people are the first victims. So find solution in chaos is the big challenge I'm confronted every single day for the past year of my 30-year career. Myself, a former athlete, that's the reason why sport lies at the center of my heart, and an amateur athlete that can no longer run because terrorism has impeded that to do so, with my attack that I, lived while in Mogadishu, Somalia. All is fine. I walk, I run, but I can't run the way I was running in the past. But then, nevertheless, sports have taught me really that resilience, which I try to share every day in my leadership. I live in Niger. As you might know, Niger is at the heart of the Sahel, of the Central Sahel region, a region in flames, a region that is impacted by the intent and the capacity of terrorism to strike and to destabilize the vital nerves and the vital breath of the everyday life. This is how I like, unfortunately, to describe to you, to send you the scent of what terrorism is. They sweep away what is ordinary life, and therefore education, health, and of course sports. But despite that, I would like to also share the beauty of Niger, which is the poorest country in the world, but has put solidarity at the center of a political parkour, and therefore has always welcomed refugees in this region, as well as leaving the borders open despite COVID. The borders of Niger are closed for COVID purpose, but are open for humanitarian purpose. I think this is a great lesson that, especially for us Europeans, is worthwhile thinking. How does sport come and inclusion come into our leadership, into our program here? I would like to focus on first of all, on how I imagine inclusion. And I would like to use the word of Nelson Mandela, at the end of his speech, when he says that sports has the power to change the world. Inclusion for me is really laughing in the face of all discrimination. That is the best way to describe the meaning of the word inclusion, meaning putting the person at the center, valuing the others, and leaving nobody behind, which is also the goal of the 2030 millennium, leaving nobody behind. Or utilizing the words of Pope Francis in his audience yesterday, everybody is precious in front of the eyes of God. With these two, strong words, leaving nobody behind, because we are precious. I am so honored to see that sports, in a way, in its DNA, has this energy. In its DNA, has this capacity to design, to build the space, like where everybody has the opportunity to cultivate and to cultivate the community. The space of a team building, the space where the other is no longer somebody we don't know, but the space where we can experience that we value. I will share the example of one of the 5 projects I have here in Niger. Niger is a vast operation for UNHCR. I supervise and manage over 400 staff, and I take care of over 500,000 persons, between refugees, IDPs, and persons of concern to UNHCR crossing the road towards the desert, towards Libya. We have a project, and as we speak, the plane has just taken off, where we evacuate people coming out of the detention centers of Libya. These are persons of concern to UNHCR, Somalis, Eritreans, Yemenis, Ethiopians, that have been in detentions for months and years, and that in the evacuation found the only way to save their life and avoid the tragic life journey of the Mediterranean. It's sports that we are utilizing today to make them feel inclusive together with the young Nigerians, but it's through sports that we want them to recuperate. And Christina was talking about the breath of life, the breath of hope. Through sports, we are helping these people through soccer, through volleyball, through taekwondo, through whatever we can have according to who is available to teach, to have them feel that they can be included again in that space of sharing, in that space of where your talents can be described. Soccer, needless to say, is the number one where everybody wants to be part of. Soccer is found everywhere, even in the middle of the desert. This is our transit center where basketball has started to become really also very, very famous. These people have gone through hell, trauma, torture, physical violence, extortion. All we have learned is going on in Libya. I can assure you it's true, it's correct. It's through sport that we believe we can make them understand that they are still persons and they have still a possibility to show their talents. It's for me the opportunity to call upon everybody to come and join also this support. Why? Because these people tomorrow, you will find them in Italy, you will find them in the UK, you will find them in Sweden, you will find them probably in all the places of you friends at this platform, because we are reinserting them through legal pathways to come and join you in your countries. We have saved over 3,000 lives and saved also through sports. So what they learn here in sport, maybe they can continue in the countries where they will be welcomed. A very pragmatic, a very practical, and a very interesting, if you want, psychotherapy. Because in this line, and I conclude, for us, it's sports and therapy. And I launch an appeal. We are open to collaborate with everybody, with the universities, where this reflection can continue to be amplified, whereby sport can be the positive answer to the suffering of many, many years of walking towards safety, walking towards the desert, and walking and sometimes even sailing through a dangerous sea. I just launched some ideas. I won't take much of the time so that we have time for questions, but here are our kids. Sports here in Niger for UNHCR is at the center of my protection response. And I'm also glad to conclude and say that I was part also of the making of the UNHCR IOC refugee team that will compete, we hope soon, next year in Tokyo. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Alessandra. Thank you very much for your words. I think that many of us will be happy to have the possibility to ask you some questions to know more about these projects you are doing in Niger, and you have done also in other parts of the world. But I'm wondering, maybe a first question for the discussion: how can we reestablish the faith in humanity to all these people after situations like Greece or the torture establishments in Libya, etc., and how we can help through sports to help these people and to reestablish, as I said, the faith in humanity. But allow me to introduce before the discussion our keynote speaker, Mr. Timothy Shriver. Mr. Timothy Shriver, he's an American. He's married to Linda Potter and has 5 adult children. He's a PhD in education from the University of Connecticut. Even he has studied also in Yale University and also in Catholic University of America. And he has produced 4 films and he's the author of the New York Times best-selling Fully Alive, Discovering What Matters Most, and has written articles for dozens of newspapers and magazines. And we could say that he has done a lot in his life, but we have invited him here today because he leads Special Olympics, which is an organization that I think most of you already know, and is present in more than 190 countries with more than 5 million athletes to promote health, education, and a more unified world through the joy of sport. And we have asked Timothy Shriver to talk about the value of inclusion on sport and how sport are a means to vehicle inclusion on society, especially in this time we are living during the pandemic, to send us a sign of hope to all of us that this pandemic can be also an opportunity not to be missed, as we entitled this session, to restart with a different approach toward those who are willing to play, but they have difficulties to access. So, Timothy, thank you very much for being with us, and the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Santiago. Thank you so much for my predecessors here, Christina, for your comments on the human person, which were so profound, and Alessandra for your work in chaos. I don't want to make light of the work of bringing order out of chaos, but I wish you were running for president of my country, because we have quite a lot of chaos. Unfortunately, it's the kind willfully created as opposed to the tragic forms. But anyway, it's an honor to follow both of you and to be a part in some small way of the same spirit, the same movement, the same energy. And Santiago, thank you for including me. And I'm delighted to see my old friend, Monsignor Melchor, who's here in his office. I miss you. We've had so many good times together in Rome, bringing the athletes of Special Olympics to the presence of Pope Francis. So many times, actually, it's quite extraordinary. The Holy Father has welcomed our athletes, it seems, more than almost anyone. We have more luck meeting with the Holy Father with our athletes than we do with some mayors of small towns, which speaks, I think, to the extraordinary awareness that the Holy Father has of the urgency of discovering the face of God in every human person, particularly those human persons, as Christina noted, who are more likely to be excluded. So I know the time is a little short, so I was gonna bore you for 25 minutes, but I'm gonna try to speed it up here and try to take you through a quicker version of this presentation, so we have a little bit of time for questions. As Santiago mentioned, I represent the Special Olympics movement. We're often confused with the Paralympics. We focus exclusively on people with intellectual disability, people with cognitive challenges, people with learning challenges. So unlike our brothers and sisters over in the Paralympic movement who focus on all forms of disability, our focus is limited to this particular population. And it is focused on using the power of sport to change society. And I just want to dwell on this for a minute to build on the comments of both Christina and Alessandra here for just a moment. Because it's one thing to, as many organizations do, to look at sport and go, well, what can sport teach us? What problem can it solve? Our movement starts with a different evolution. It starts from the perspective that there is a problem to be solved, and sport is the means to solve it. And so we are in the business of social change, but I want to distinguish elements of social change, because most of the time, when people think of social change, they think of changing rights, changing laws, changing policies, changing structures. Even the work of the human rights movement is largely focused on rights, which is terrific. I have no complaint with it. But we like to say there's the human side of human rights, the heart-changing side of social change, the attitude change side, which is often left out of campaigns, efforts, organizations, movements to change a particular dimension of society. Our work is almost exclusively at the level of changing hearts and minds. And so right now, I'd like to invite every member, if you're able to give a little bit of attention to this, to remember the last time you changed your mind or your heart. We did a poll on this a few months ago, and we found that in some places, 90% of people say they haven't changed their mind in the last year on anything, which is a striking finding. But I'm going to hope that each of you can call to mind a moment recently, maybe it was today, maybe it was this week, maybe it was this month, maybe it was this year, when your mind or heart was changed. And I want you to just think about that moment for a minute and carry it into this conversation if we could. So our work, let me see if I can get this to work here. Let's see, I don't know why that's not working. There we go. Let me begin with this image. This is a young man, a 58-year-old man, Ives Green. He was the first person in the state of Louisiana in the United States to die of COVID. He was living in a group home. You can see him here. We don't know too much about his life. I don't, but I know that his family wrote on the occasion of his death back in the spring that Ives had a lot more living to do. You could say this is true of, I dare say, almost every person on earth who has an intellectual disability. Count the number, 200 million, maybe 300 million, maybe even higher. Almost all of them, right now, have a lot more living they could do if it weren't for the injustice and intolerance and neglect that persists in developed and developing countries alike, in countries of all different religious and ethnic traditions. Ives Green's family's words have stuck with me for these last 6 months. A lot more living to do. So how does sport? This is our mission, to convince the world. Now, people think we're here for the athletes. Oh yes, this child can benefit, this adult can benefit. This is an opportunity for them to have their chance. Yes, it's true, but we are equally here to change the hearts and minds of those who watch, for those of us who have been on the side of being excluders. Now, I'm going to also be a little bit aggressive here and invite you to recognize that you have been an excluder, that I have been an excluder, that I have overlooked the gifts of people who come at me and someone says they have a 50 IQ, or come to me and says someone that they have challenges speaking, or that they have challenge walking, or that they have challenges reading, or that they have challenges taking care of themselves. All of the biases that pop into my head, even now, lead to the outcome where a man like Ives Green, who had a lot more living to do, doesn't get his chance. We are all in need of changing our hearts and our minds. So in the United States, let's just look at a couple of quick statistics. Here's the health status of people with intellectual disability in our organization. These are not people on the sidelines. 80% are overweight or obese. 30% have untreated tooth decay. 40% tend to have visual challenges that have not been addressed. This is arguably, on a per capita basis, the richest country in the world. We know recently, last year, The Missing Billion was published that chronicles for people with all disabilities the extraordinary barriers to healthcare. And again, this is not just a developed or developing world challenge. This is across the board. So the persistence of intolerance seeps into systems, creating cancers of exclusion across the board. There are multiple barriers, for instance, to healthcare, inadequate education. We've scanned health professionals, doctors, and depending on where you talk to them and which profession, somewhere between 60 and 90% of doctors and healthcare professionals will say they don't have the skill to treat a person with an intellectual disability. So they actively exclude based on absence of skill. This is not something that goes hidden. This is in the open. And there are many other barriers here. I'm going to go through this a little more quickly. Here's a picture that I'm sorry to say is not rare. A little boy, Malaki, and if you look closely at the picture, you'll see in the lower right-hand corner the child care system for this young boy. It is a chain with a lock that is placed on him every morning by his mother who has no alternative but to care for her son by chaining him daily. Out of shame, absence of medical support, I'm sorry to say absence of religious support. When we found Malaki, our volunteers found him, there was a church almost just 4 blocks away. He had never been. Somehow, this mom, imagine yourself, if you have children, with your own child. And if you don't, imagine your mother or father taking you in the morning and putting a lock on your ankle out of shame and lack of opportunity. This is a person 40 years old in the United States. This is the quality of dental care for people with intellectual disability in the United States of America. No, not in Niger, in the United States, not in the poorest country in the world, in the richest country in the world. 40 years old. This isn't something that just happened. This is something where the system actively creates these problems. So let me say what we do. Here's the Special Olympics movement. So you say, what do we have to do with all that? So don't worry, you don't have to read this busy slide, but just take note of a couple of numbers. Upper left-hand corner, almost 7 million participants a year in communities around the world participate in local sport activity, people with and without intellectual disabilities playing together. Most of those events take place in community settings. I'll say a little bit more about this in a minute and why that's important. If you look at the green line across the top, you'll see almost over 150,000 health screenings a year at these games. So we have brought the doctors to try to change their hearts, change their minds, change their skills, open their practices to people with intellectual disabilities. You can see a whole array, over 100,000 schools where we have tried to bring what we call unified sport to the school. Why? To change the heart and mind of the child who doesn't have a disability, so that that child won't grow up to be someone whose heart is hardened, but so that child will grow up to be someone whose heart is open, who sees the human person. Because at 6 or 8 or 12, they played soccer together and they didn't see a person with a disability. They saw a striker or a goalkeeper or a defense person or a basketball or a point guard or a sprinter. The labels shifted in their hearts and minds, we hope. This is what most of these events look like. Our brothers and sisters in the Olympic movement often will say, when's the next Special Olympics? I say this afternoon. There are 100,000 of these kinds of events every day. So take note, not just of the runner, but of the spectator, the occasional person who chances upon the sight of that child, that girl, who at the starting line, put yourself on the sidelines for a moment. Think of all the images that come to mind. Maybe the moment of birth, maybe the sadness of the mother when she found out of the father that their child wasn't, as the doctors might say, healthy. Think of the challenges when that mom or dad went to find a childcare. No, we don't have, went to go to school. 90% of these children will never go to school today. All of the stigma, all of the exclusion, all of the no's, we can't help your child. We don't have anything for your child. We have nothing for you. And you're maybe feeling and hearing all this, and you see this race and the child finishes the race, the arms go up in the air, and maybe she came in third or fourth. And maybe that mother for the first time in her life goes over and gives that child a hug and hears the cheers of her community. And I invite you, if it's possible, to imagine your own shift, almost in the way in which the Catholic Church would have thought about sacramental transformation, the actual real presence of encounter with something much bigger than you can imagine. So these are images of a movement, athletes leading, Frank Stevens in the upper right-hand corner, all of these activities. What are we trying to do? We're trying to take the power of sport and use it for a very specific goal, to have encounters between people who are excluded and people who are excluding, to make those encounters non-judgmental. We don't blame and shame. To make those encounters grounded in giftedness, not in weakness or vulnerability, and to make those encounters celebrations of improvement, not comparisons of normative performance. Encounter, non-judgment, celebration, gifts. In our view, almost the recipe for the shifting of hearts and minds. When doctors come, here's what they're able to do. You know, this is just taken on an iPhone. It's just one dentist who came to volunteer and who found James and said, come to my practice. This is within our reach. But here's the challenge, and I just want to bring this up and then I'll go very quickly to my closing. In the United States, this is recent data, I wish I had it globally. Sport is largely a system that is designed to eliminate as many people as possible from participation. Let's be honest about this. In the United States, the average child today will quit playing sport at the age of 11. Not 21, not 61 when your knees hurt like mine. Not, I'm sorry to say, after terrible accidents, at the age of 11. And the reason they will quit is because the system will start to tell them they're no good. This is the average child. Most people bring to sport a subtle but quite explicit framework that says, I'm looking for the best performer. Our movement brings a very different question. We're looking for your best performance. One is comparative and normative. The other is personal and developmental. One celebrates the best. The other celebrates your gift. Now, I'm going to submit to us that if we don't attack this core problem, forget Special Olympics for a minute, if we don't attack this core problem, which is that most of the culture of sport actually pressures children and adults not to participate, I know this sounds a little bit shocking, but I believe it's true. Unless we attack this problem and begin to build a model of sport that celebrates the ideal that everyone should play always. If you're wonderful at the sport, fantastic. Play and compete against your level. If you're challenged in the sport, also fantastic. Play and compete at your level. To me, this is a great challenge for us. So here's our hope. This is a school in Rhode Island in the United States. This school participates. You can see all these children are over 11. Hopefully you can see they have children with and without intellectual challenges that work and play together on their club, their Special Olympics club. They rewrote their school's pledge, their school's motto. And you can see it here. If we were face to face, I'd invite us to play with it a little bit as a team, but I'll just read it. But I invite you to read it as I do. As a member of, and imagine this for your organization. Maybe you want to revise it. I'm not saying it's perfect. We've chosen it for our movement worldwide. But as a member of the Vatican family, let's just play it that way. I pledge to look for the lonely, the isolated, the left out, the challenged, and the bullied. I pledge to overcome the fear of difference and replace it with the power of inclusion. I choose to include. These kids didn't say, I pledge to tolerate. They said, I pledge to go look for. I pledge to seek out. I pledge to make the effort. I pledge to overcome the fear. Imagine if each of us could say that every day. I pledge to overcome my fear. I pledge to look today, not just to wait for it to be met by a moment of tolerance or openness or love, but to look for it. Look for the person, to go find and seek the person on the margins. These are the words of kids, using the power of sport to create a different culture. This is a video which I don't think we have time for, but so I want to just close with this image. This, forget the guy on the left who looks kind of out of control. This is the opening ceremonies of the 2019 Special Olympics World Summer Games in Abu Dhabi. The fellow on the right is the young boy you saw in the chain a few slides ago. You can see he has a gift. You can see he can run. You can see he can smile. You can see he is a child of God. How painful is it for us to recognize that without a few good volunteers, he would be in a chain today? And how painful is it for most of us, if we're honest, to recognize that the invisible chains are all around us, even today. Sport can create the encounter without blame, based on gift, to celebrate every single person in the human family. Nothing else that we have found can do that. I don't come to you to defend sport or argue for sport for any reason other than that I'm a cold-blooded seeker of the best means to make a difference. And this is the way to do it. I was trained as a teacher. I taught in public schools. I worked in child development. I worked amongst the mystics, in the literature of the mystics. I looked over and over again at the question of how the inner life is changed. For me, it's on the playing field. Thank you. I'll stop there.
Thank you. Thank you, Timothy, for this presentation and for so many interesting things you just have shared with us. I would like to underline maybe what you said at the end, that we have to try to look for our best performance, which is not the best performance at all, but it's the effort to go beyond our expectations, to overcome the fear, to look for the lonely, the marginalized, the disabled. I think it's a very nice pledge, the one that the Ponagance family.
Good pronunciation, Santiago.
They did, and I agree with you that it could be also used for many other institutions. So let's go directly to the discussion. I think there will be a lot of questions for all three speakers we have had today. So I remember the system. You can raise your hand on the Zoom platform, or if you prefer, you can write on the chat you want to talk, and I will give you the word. Or if you prefer not to talk directly, you can write the question on the chat and I will ask directly to the speakers. So feel free to contact me if you want to ask them anything. So while there's questions for you, I would like to recall this question I formulated to Alessandra before, how we can reestablish the faith in humanity to all these people through sports after situations like what we have seen many times on the news about Libya or in Greece, the refugee camps, because these things are really create a big trauma, not only physically, but also psychologically. So I would like to know, in your experience, when you introduce sports in these situations, how they react.
Yeah, thank you very much, and once again, really for this opportunity to share this thematic, which is a very challenging and important one, because it's at the center of history right now, and at the center of the Mediterranean route and the Western European route. We're dealing here, as I said, with people that have left home several years ago, and their profile is characterized, their soul is characterized by years and years of walking in survival mode, away from education, away from a social structure, away from work, just in survival mode. And most of the time ending up in the path of the smugglers, which are certainly not a path of kindness or growth or awareness, but it's violence after violence. They end up in the prisons of Libya, where marginalization and certainly everything contrary to inclusion happens to them. So when they land, and in a few hours, 137 will land, the first flight after COVID, the lockdown in Niger after COVID. When they land, the experience that I had the first times I went to welcome them is, like the French would say, un regard dans le vide, uno sguardo nel vuoto, a look in the emptiness. So basically, you're welcoming a brother and a sister that is literally landing in a new reality, but landing in freedom. This sense of breaking the chains that Tim was saying. When they come off that plane, they land in a country, the poorest country in the world, that is saying, my brother, my sister, I welcome you here, you're free. So we have in place a structure headed by a psychologist that deals with psychosocial activities, not only therapy, psychiatric and psychological therapy, but psychosocial activities where sport is basically at the center. Any sport that allow them to move, to regain the movement after the breaking of that chain that Tim was so well explaining. Regaining that dignity that Christina was saying, that dignity of being precious to the eye, of being a son of God and part of that humanity. Running, screaming, punching, through Taekwondo also, everything that allows that person to elaborate the pain that he or she went through is necessary through activities in sport. So obviously COVID has stopped all of this. For a certain long time, almost 4 months, none of this activity was available because we had to respect. But now we are slowly doing it, restarting again. And let me tell you that I have seen the difference of a population that has not been involved in sports activity because I could feel tension, anxiety kicking in again. So recuperating that faith in humanity, first of all within themselves, through an activity of inclusion like sports, where basically one would say, you count here you belong. I think Tim and Christina has highlighted that. Here we have chosen to include you, and once you feel included, you belong. So this I Belong is a very strong campaign that UNHCR also launches every year with regards to statelessness, okay? But being in prison, being marginalized, being excluded, for me is like being stateless in a way. If we talk about we are all part of that same humanity, okay? So I belong, I choose to include you, I belong. I see that happening as a miracle under our eyes when they cheer for a goal, or when they cheer because they have done a basket, when they cheer because they learn how to swim. Swimming with 1 or 2 pools we have in Niamey, the capital. We don't have the luxury of having swimming pools, but when they start touching the water for the first time after many of them have gone through the drowning in the Mediterranean, because what happens is that many boats are stopped by the Libyan guard coasts. They are taken back into those ships and brought back into detention, not to freedom, brought back into detention when they are intercepted in the Mediterranean. And so having them touch for the first time the water and get friendly with the water there are some pictures where you can see that is an extraordinary, it's a miracle happening in front of your eyes. So it's creating that space where they elaborate the trauma, but they elaborate it through the I belong, finally I belong back experience.
Thank you, Alessandra. I have one question from Kevin Talek Marston to all of you.
Thank you, Santiago. I think you can hear me.
Yes.
Fantastic. I wanted just to make a question in effect to all 3 of you. Thank you very much. It was very, very interesting. Christina, you mentioned at the beginning that there is a norm on what is acceptable in sport, etc. And you said that there's obviously a chance to challenge this norm by learning from the disabled. And there is, I know you've done some work writing on also the inner life within Edith Stein, and how that can kind of change, which links in effect to Tim, the mention that you made, which is largely about changing the inside. Your social change is an inner change, not a structural change, okay, which I thought was very, very interesting in terms of the focus of the movement. So I wondered a little bit about that because of the fact that, you know, most of sport is a money-driven sport, at least at the elite performance level. And that brings me in a sense to Alessandra, because you mentioned, you know, I loved your definition of inclusion, laughing in the face of discrimination. I thought that was an incredible definition. And yet my question, in a sense, to the three of you is, how can a sport organization actually challenge the hegemony of commercially driven sport? You know, we know that largely sport is at the elite level is a commercially driven thing. And so, you know, I know that there are efforts by Alessandra, by the UNHCR, with refugee programs, with UEFA, with the IOC, etc. But there is a tension between the participation and inclusion that each one of you has described, and this power of the market, of the commercial, of what is commercially viable in terms of sport. So I would be curious if the three of you had thoughts on how you can reconcile those two aspects, if that's possible.
I would like just to clarify that laughing in the face of all discrimination, I wish it came from me. It's from Nelson Mandela.
Ah, okay.
So, signori.
Grande, bravo.
Nel mio cuore, esatto, in tutta onestà.
Ottimo, grazie mille.
I mean, it's not an easy question to answer. I think when the Paralympics were on in the United Kingdom, what struck me was the potential that the Games had to enable people who would probably have stayed at home to actually go out and just be who they were. So all of a sudden, the tyranny of normacy was ripped apart, and difference became the new norm. So I noticed that people of all shapes and sizes, and just people of different living experiences, began to go out, and they uncovered their limbs that were missing, and so they became members. Well, no, that's not the right thing. They took their place in a very ordinary way as people who were, as Tim said so powerfully, part of the audience as well as those who participated. And what I noticed was the potential that each and every person had from within their body to be a witness to what it meant to be a huge, diverse, and incredibly valuable human community, like I said, with potential. So how do you challenge the sport-driven, the money-driven organisations? Well, you make sure that we don't choose to include. There is no choice in inclusion. Each and every person, just by the fact that they exist in the world, belong to the human story, and as such should belong to what it means to be a sport organisation. So within that, if you see each and every person as a potential customer or a potential participant and a potential sports person, then everybody has a place within that who's going to buy into sport, if you know what I mean. So your audience isn't just the people that we choose to include as sports people. So non-disabled people come to watch disabled people play sport, but we recognise that actually there's a place for everybody within that. And so therefore, I think what disability in sport does is it gives witness to that potential, so that you don't see elite sport as only a classical body or as a classically trained Paralympian. And I think that what the power of, I hope I'm answering the question well enough, saying what I want to say. What I think the Special Olympics does is it goes into a community and it transforms it. And it shows the potential of working together. which then opens up the eyes and the hearts of those organisations that see everything only in monetary. You know, and I think that one of the things that I noticed in the 2012 sport, the Olympic sports in England, was that everybody became a customer, everybody became a provider, everybody became a sharer in this incredible event. I only wish that we would celebrate, and I can remember speaking to Tim once about this. I only wish that we could celebrate the Special Olympics in the United Kingdom and all over the world in exactly the same way, by allowing that potential to be released and showing the people that buy into sport what's possible. I hope I answered that correctly, but I hope I managed to say
I'll just offer a very short, thank you, Christina, for that. Just a very short additional point. I support what you're saying. I think, you know, what I feel happens in moments like when the Paralympics were on in the UK, and you described it so well, Christina, I think there is, at a psychological level, a revealing of the shadow. I mean, this is language from Carl Jung. Somehow, the presence of the athlete who, in a normative worldview, doesn't fit in, reveals the shadow of your own hidden self. And people are all of a sudden freed from the tyranny of suppressing their own broken, weak, unfinished, imperfect selves. You know, because if you watch Wimbledon, most people don't think to themselves, that could be me. They admire, of course, the great athlete. I certainly do. I love watching great athletes. But it separates me from them more than it connects me to them. And it makes, at some subtle level, the hiddenness of my own shame, my own weakness is reinforced. Whereas the Special Olympic athlete, the Paralympic athlete, in some way is saying to you, let it out, brother. Let it out, sister. Now, my last, just very quick point is, I think this model of sport wins when it has a justifiable and measurable outcome. Because big money sport will continue to do what it does, and God bless it. Again, I'm a fan of big time sports, so I'm not trying to demean it. But when we, for instance, in our work, when we've been able to document reductions in bullying in schools as a whole, when the school climate starts to shift, the principal, the teachers, the administrators, the parents go, wait a second, you did you got people to play together and that's what happened? We need to do that because it has a functional benefit, not just a spiritual one, not just a philosophical one, not just even a social justice one, but a functional benefit to our school. Anyway, so the link here, if I can make it quickly, is that when we allow the shadow, when we allow, if I can use religious language, light in the darkness, we create functional shifts in the way in which communities are organized. We have to be able to document those shifts, and then the money and the resources will flow, not just to big time sport, but also to participatory sport. There should be no school or sports club that, honestly, I know this sounds radical, that excludes anyone from participation. Sorry. Okay. Yeah.
No. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. No. Sorry. I thought you were finished. But
I am finished. I am.
No, because we have a lot of questions to all of you. I have one question for you, Tim. Hermie, which I believe that he joined us from the Philippines, says, in what way is the Catholic Church involved and partner with your organization, considering that what you do align with the teaching and desires of the Church? And in what way can this partnership be developed and deepened? Sorry.
It's a good question. We do some work on this model, we call this Unified Champion Schools model, this model of using sport to teach inclusivity, to teach the healing, the empathy, the compassion, the respect, and the dignity that come from what we believe are the outcomes of our experiences. We do have some partnerships with Catholic schools in various parts of the world. In fact, Melchior and I, we talked about this some years ago, strengthening this with even from the Vatican level. It hasn't resulted in any major expansion of our presence in Catholic education, but it has certainly resulted in incremental improvements. I think there's also many members of the Catholic leadership, both religious men and women, who have been very powerful advocates for and promoters of our work, but it tends to be more catch as catch can. At the level of Catholic teaching, I think there is still work to be done, actually, where the athletes, where people with disabilities still have lessons to teach us about what we would typically have called Catholic social teaching, but I'd like to think of as Catholic spiritual teaching. We don't have quite as big a canon of Catholic spiritual teaching as we do of Catholic social teaching, at least not in public discourse. But we need Catholic spiritual teaching to come along with Catholic social teaching and Catholic moral teaching and Catholic ethical teaching. In my view, this is just one layperson's view, we need Catholic spiritual teaching to come along. And I think if it did, it would provide powerful intersectionality with the work of inclusive sport, because it is in these moments, in my view, when hearts and minds shift that touch on the spirit that blows, as the saying goes, blows where it will, and sometimes is better received in moments when we're unguarded, which is what I think happens a lot. So anyway, that's, sorry, slightly long answer, but
no.
I think there's plenty of room for improvement in our collaboration.
Thank you. Vittorio had one question. Vittorio Scelzo.
Good afternoon. This is Vittorio Scelzo. I work for the Dicastery for Laity, Family and Life, and within the Dicastery, I deal with the issue of disability.
We lost you, Vittorio.
And the question is,
I'm sorry, Vittorio, we lost you. We're going to, with another question in the meantime. Can you hear us now, Vittorio?
Yes, I can hear you.
Sorry, we didn't hear you. Can you repeat the question?
Okay. I appreciate very much what Timothy Shriver told about people being locked, and I think it is something very true, not only in the poor countries. I think that in Italy there are many people who are bedbound because of the problem they have. So I think that there is really a problem of people bound, people locked.
I'm honestly, I don't know if it's just me or we lost the connection.
It's us. It's all of us.
Oh, I'm sorry. So in the meantime, I'm going to ask Vittorio to try it later, but I would like to address another question to Timothy and Cristina from Daniele Pasquini from the John Paul Foundation for Sports. He says grassroots sport tends to be inclusive, but when sport competition becomes higher and higher, sport becomes selective. How to find the right balance?
Well, I'll just go very quickly. Our model is that it's a little, I don't know if those of you might be familiar with the Nike motto, if you have a body, you're an athlete. That's our model. So whatever your ability level is, we try to create a sporting competition that fits your ability level. Now, this should seem kind of common sense to people because everyone knows that, let's say, 10 and under girls play against other girls 10 and under in football or basketball, or 12 and under or 14 and under. So what are we doing when we say there's an age or a gender restriction? It's saying that you play against people of your age and gender, not against people who are 25. You don't box or wrestle against a 19-year-old if you're 8. So we try to take that to its logical conclusion, which is that you should your whole life compete against someone of comparable ability, whether they're your age or not. If I run the 100 in 18 seconds, that's my best time, and so too does Melchior. We should run against each other. We should not run against Santiago, who runs it in 12, or against Christina, who runs it in 10:5. That would only serve to reinforce the fact that I'm not as good as someone else. So we create a participatory model that is competitive. I would run against a person of my same ability, and I would win or lose the race, but not to exclude me in the next round. That's normally the way it goes. We run against each other. The winner of our race goes to the next round, and then somebody loses. No, if I win in my race or Melchior defeats me, then he gets the gold, I get the silver, we're done. We don't have, it's not a cheap gold, it's not a preliminary gold, it's the gold. That's your race. So our view is that competitive and participatory sport should be fused in a model where everybody participates in a competition at their ability level, rather than everybody participates until they get eliminated because there's a hierarchical normative definition of good and bad.
Thank you. I don't know, Christina, if you want to add something briefly, because we have a lot of questions.
Yeah. Well, I think that the message of sport, the one thing we've got to do in sport is to confront the veil that Tim was talking about. And we've got to begin to talk about inclusive sport, not as something that's compartmentalized, but that's part of the whole process of educating children and thinking and talking about sport wherever we are. I think sport at its best has to do what it's best at, and that it has to enable, and it has to release that message that actually every single person, according to their ability, as Tim says, is not just vulnerable or not just not able or not able, but that we are all value able. And so therefore, if sport's doing what sport does, it presents that image of each and every person having something to give, something to offer. That's what happens in school, in sport. So I think that inclusive sport, disability, Special Olympics, all of this needs to be studied in school as a normal part of the education, the physical education that goes on in a school. We've got to stop compartmentalizing Special Olympics, Paralympics, Olympics, and get on talking about these issues together.
Thank you, Christina. I'm going to address the question to Alessandra now. Let me find, because there's a lot of questions here on the chat. Father Pasquale said, you spoke at the end of your talk about the participation of a team of refugees to the Olympic Games in Tokyo next year. Could you tell us something more?
Yes. Oops.
Yes. We hear you.
Yes, thank you very much for this question. And yes, Kevin, I will say hello to Nick. We have been working together for a year, definitely, while I was waiting for my posting here in Niger, in Italy. The refugee team was really a joint idea between the High Commissioner and the President of the OIC. To really put in practice, to create visibility, and to inclusion, to give a body to inclusion, to give a narrative to inclusion, to give a story to inclusion, and not to just have inclusion as a theory that sits on that little pinky cloud, but to incarnate it really into a reality. And so why not show to the world that refugees belong also to this space that Christina and Tim have so well been sharing with us and reflecting with us. So it started with the Rio de Janeiro, the first experience, where a group of 10 people with different discipline and different nationalities entered the stadium of Maracanã under the 5-circle flag. An incredible emotion. The entire Maracanã stadium stood up when this team passed. And who were they? Refugees from Sudan, great runners, by the way, living in the refugee camp of Dadaab and Kakuma, two Syrian swimmers, one of them really that even had to push the rescued boat from the sea in Greece, and then a judo player, but mainly runners from Sudan. So this team is not closed, it's open. And whenever we feel and we see that there is a talent among the refugees that show that potential, it goes. The refugee team is not a team where people can say, oh, how nice and sweet, look at them. No, these are professionals who did not have the chance to continue because of war. So it is also telling to the world, look what war does. It stops everything that is related to growth, to hope, to dreams. So in a nutshell, that's the aim. The refugee team, the athletes that enter the stadium and that perform are professionals, but they carry a message. I now belong because of sports, and I have a narrative, and I have an appeal. May peace prevail on earth.
Thank you, Alessandra. I'm going to try to address the question that Vittorio was trying to do before. He was saying, I appreciate what Tim Shriver has said about people being blocked. This is something that happens also in rich societies. We have plenty of people with disabilities bedbound in Italy. There's a need to unlock people. Don't you think that also paternalism, the presumption that many of us have of being superior, is a chain that bounds many persons with disabilities? Thank you.
Well, if that question's for me, the answer is a simple yes. There's no question that paternalism, hierarchicalism, if I can use the term colonialisms of various sorts and types that creep into our interactions, has a very cancerous effect on the lives of people with intellectual disabilities. It's the reason I have tried to argue or promote the idea that in our work, I like to say that Special Olympics was started as a movement for people with intellectual disabilities, but it has become, almost from its inception, a movement from them. So the vector of change, as it turns out, is not them. Vittorio, I see, I think this is the picture of your son in your background. The challenge of our movement is not to change him. Yes, to give him justice, opportunity, dignity, equality, of course. We don't shrink from the challenge of changing the system in order to give him his shot, but not because he's lesser, not because he's somehow weaker, not because he needs me, God forbid, but because we need him. And we need his lesson, and we need his ideas. And so these exchanges have to become exchanges of mutual discovery. I think this is, something where, again, the church has both traditions rich in its past, but a lot of times our emphasis on service and charity has led us to think that the rich should give to the poor, or the privileged to the underprivileged, or those who have to those who have not, as though it were a transactional encounter. Money changes hands, goods and services change hands. I'm not against it. But if it comes with a residual superiority, a residual separation, a residual arrogance, then it does no good. I'm going to go right out and say it. That if it is not designed to heal the breach, heal the gap, you know, in the words of the prophet Isaiah, that we become healers of the breach, which means we both cross, we end the chasm. And the chasm isn't just a chasm of goods and services. The chasm is a chasm of hearts and minds. And this is where I believe our athletes have so much to teach, not just to learn.
Thank you. Thank you, Timothy. I have another question from Alessia. As a coach, where we can find resources to learn to grow on this fundamental subject that is never included in coaching courses? I don't know if any of you want to answer the question. Maybe Timothy.
Say it again. I lost you for a second there.
Oh, sorry.
Santiago. Can you repeat
sorry,
it?
Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can.
Yeah.
I lost you for a second.
So Alessia was asking, as a coach, where we can find resources to learn to grow on this fundamental subject that is never included in coaching courses.
Yeah. Well, I'll mention a couple of ideas. I mean, first of all, we have a pretty big online coaching platform, coaches education platform, where people can access materials. I'm sure the Paralympics also have the same thing. I don't know, but we have, and it's gotten quite a lot of traffic during COVID because, of course, people are doing things online. So there are coaches courses and videos and the like. There's also a group called the Positive Coaching Alliance, PCA. We're not affiliated with it as an organization, but they have been pushing for the transformation of coaches education to become more grounded in the development of the human person. I know Right to Play, which is changing over time. There are many organizations now that do see sport as a means to solving a social problem. So I would suggest all of those sites as potential places to find better training for coaches. Some of the big universities that work in physical education and in coaches education are taking this on also, but I'm unfortunately on the tip of my tongue, I don't have those resources handy.
Thank you. Another question from Father Kelly to you. He says, your emphasis on the activity itself having value makes me think of play as the fundamental category, and sport is a kind of play. This can account for appeal of elite intramural recreation, Special Olympic sports, and it connects it to joy. As Pope Francis put it once, play reminds us of joy, the joy of the Lord. In this way, it links to spirituality. What do you think of this?
I think it's absolutely right. Sometimes I use play, Pat, instead of sport to bring this image to life, especially when we're talking about very early child development. As any child development person will tell you, pediatrician, children learn largely through play, starting at around 18 months and continuing well into the adulthood, actually. But they learn very important issues. They learn object permanence, they learn relationship skills, they learn self-image, they learn it through mirroring and the activities of play. It's almost irrefutable that play is the place in which the imagination meets growth and development, language, cognition, motor control, all these things. So, but if you hear quickly, I maybe made the point too quickly, but the imaginal realm is fruitful territory for growth and development and change. And in some ways, sport is just a small category of play. And it is a category in which we enter into an alternate sort of space, new rules, new structures, new roles. I'm no longer Tim when I'm on the field. I'm now a striker. I have a lane, I have a skill, I have a role, I become a different person. It allows me to exercise a different consciousness, which is what I would call the imaginal realm. If we can use the ways in which this sparks the spirit to channel it towards the spiritual gifts, maybe we could use Galatians, love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness. I know all my priest and nun friends will have memorized those gifts, but if we thought to ourselves, how can play and sport teach those gifts? I think we'd find ourselves coming up with very creative and very beautiful expressions of how sport and play and spirituality intersect.
Thank you very much. And I don't know if there's anyone who wants to address another question for our speakers, because we are about to finish. Maybe if there's anyone who wants to do a last question. Yes, Christine.
I just have a very last reflection, and that is that I've started to work in this large international school, and in the school, lots of very, very, very academically able children. And the job that I have is as a special ed teacher. So I do study skills with a lot of the children. And some of the things that I've noticed, not just here, but in schools across the world, really, anybody I've engaged with, is that when it comes to academic achievement, the child with special needs will always experience what I call a reparation for being. They sort of feel that they have to apologize for the fact that they're not as clever as everybody else, whatever being clever means. However, when I see them in class struggle, really struggle, but when they go onto the sports field and they're out there with all of their buddies and all of the other people, they come alive. Their spirit literally raises within them, and they begin to feel that they have got something to offer. And I think that every single sports program, if it were to have value, ability, and an understanding of what's achieved by not just Special Olympics, but by sport in releasing the spirit of the person, then we become the witness in the same way as the blind athlete.
Oui, Fatah, je suis en téléconférence. Dis-moi.
Who gives up their own achievement just to be and to enable the other. And then we begin to move into the realm of being a witness to the gospel. Whereas you said, Santiago, at the beginning, the love of the self and the love of the neighbor becomes evidence of the love of God. And I think that for me, that is what inclusive sport, I always feel that inclusion brings in an element of choice. And as Christians, there is no choice because we all belong. And that's what we have to evidence.
Thank you very much, Christina, for these thoughts. So I'm sorry to finish this session. I would like to thank you, all of you, for your presence, and I would like to finish showing our next and last session of this webinar sessions that we have organized together, as I said at the beginning, with the John Paul II Foundation for Sport, proposals for a better restart and anthropological ecology. It's the title of our last session, and the introduction will be followed by Daniele Pasquini, which is the president of the foundation. We will have with us Ivo Ferriani, which is a former bobsledder, and it's a member of the International Olympic Committee board. And we will have a magnificent roundtable with a Mozambican teacher, Celestino Chichongwe, who is representative of Escolas Ocurrentes for Sports in Mozambique, and Renata Simbril, the president of the Los Angeles 84 Foundation, and Jaime Fillol, former champion and Chilean tennis player. And I look forward to see you, all of you. I cannot say that tone of for the future of this project, but I can assure you that we will try to put the first stone of a project to develop different initiatives regarding what we have been talking all these days. So I hope that you enjoyed. I look forward to see you all of you next week, as I said, all the time at the same time, same channel. Don't miss it. Stay safe, and thank you very much for being here with us. God bless you. Bye-bye.